The coffee cup trembled in Lieutenant Commander Marcus Reeves' hand as he stared at the classified file on his tablet. 3 hours ago, he'd been laughing with his SEAL team about the Waitress assigned to their high-risk extraction mission. The woman serving breakfast in the officers' mess had seemed too small, too quiet, too ordinary to be piloting the I-64 Apache that would cover their insertion into Taliban-controlled territory. Her name tag had read Kazinski in faded letters, and when someone cracked a joke about hopping she could fly better than she poured coffee, she'd simply smiled and walked away without a word. Now, as Reeves scrolled through page after page of redacted mission reports, his blood ran cold. The woman they'd dismissed as a glorified waitress was Captain Alina "Ghost" Kaczynski, holder of the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Bronze Star with V device, and a classified commendation that made his security clearance insufficient to read the details. The file painted a picture that seemed impossible. 847 combat flight hours over Afghanistan, 23 successful high-risk extractions, and a kill count that surpassed most infantry soldiers he knew. But it was the photograph that stopped him cold. Kaczynski stood beside a smoking Apache helicopter, its tail rotor completely destroyed, emergency landing gear deployed in what appeared to be a Taliban compound. The timestamp showed it was taken 18 months ago. The mission summary was almost entirely redacted, but 3 words remained visible: miraculous emergency landing. Below that, a handwritten note from a general whose signature he recognized. Recommend immediate promotion and reassignment to training command. Asset too valuable for continued frontline deployment. The irony wasn't lost on him. While his team had been joking about their rookie pilot, they'd been assigned one of the most decorated combat aviators in the entire Army. The woman who'd quietly endured their mockery had single-handedly saved more special operations personnel than anyone in the room had ever worked with. Her call sign, Ghost, suddenly made perfect sense. She operated in shadows, invisible until the moment she was desperately needed. Reeves closed the file and walked to the window overlooking the tarmac. In the distance, he could see Kaczynski conducting her pre-flight inspection, moving around the Apache with practiced precision. Every gesture spoke of competence earned through fire and blood. As he watched, she paused and looked directly at him through the window, offering the same quiet smile she'd given his team at breakfast. But now he could see what they'd all missed: the steel behind her eyes, the confidence of someone who'd faced death and emerged victorious more times than most warriors could survive. The extraction mission was scheduled to begin in 6 hours. For the first time since receiving their orders, Commander Reeves felt genuinely confident they might all make it home alive. The woman his team had underestimated would be watching over them from above, and he was beginning to understand that was exactly where legends were born. Captain Alina Kaczynski finished her exterior inspection and climbed into the Apache's cockpit with fluid movements born from countless repetitions. The morning sun caught the worn fabric of her flight suit, highlighting patches that told stories her mouth never would. Each mission patch was faded from desert sun and washed clean of blood that wasn't always hers. The helicopter's interior welcomed her like an old friend. Every switch, lever, and display positioned exactly where her hands expected to find them. She'd flown this particular Apache, tail number 608745, through 37 combat missions. The aircraft bore scars that matched her own: stress fractures from hard landings under enemy fire, replaced armor plating over the cockpit, and a small dent in the fuselage that reminded her of the day she'd saved 12 Rangers from an ambush in Helmand Province. The maintenance crew had offered to fix the cosmetic damage, but she'd insisted they leave it. Some scars were worth keeping. The radio crackled to life as tower control ran through pre-mission communications checks. Ghost 77, this is Desert Base, radio check over. Her voice was steady and professional as she responded, giving no hint of the chaos brewing in her chest. In 2 hours, she'd be providing close air support for a SEAL extraction that had already gone sideways twice in planning. Intelligence suggested the target building was more heavily defended than initially reported, and the narrow extraction zone offered limited maneuvering room for an Apache. But it wasn't the tactical challenges that had her hands gripping the cyclic tighter than usual. It was the memory of Commander Reeves and his team's laughter echoing through the mess hall. She'd endured worse than their casual dismissal drill sergeants who thought women didn't belong in combat roles, fellow pilots who questioned every decision she made, ground commanders who requested someone with more experience when they saw her walk toward their briefing rooms. What they never saw was the girl who'd grown up fixing crop dusters with her grandfather in Nebraska corn fields. They didn't know about the nights she'd spent studying flight manuals while her academy classmates were partying. They couldn't understand the weight of proving herself worthy of a machine that cost $35 million and could level city blocks. Every successful mission was a victory not just against enemy forces, but against every voice that had ever suggested she didn't belong in the cockpit of a gunship. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the flight line. Other crews were beginning their pre-mission preparations, the organized chaos of military precision unfolding around her. Somewhere in the distance, the SEAL team was likely conducting final equipment checks, reviewing insertion routes, and making peace with whatever awaited them in hostile territory. None of them yet understood that their survival might depend on the woman they dismissed as a waitress, barely capable of serving coffee without spilling it. The intercom buzzed as her co-pilot and gunner, Warrant Officer 3 Jason "Tank" Morrison, climbed into the front seat. Morrison had been flying with her for 8 months, long enough to develop the kind of trust that kept combat crews alive when everything went wrong. He was one of the few who'd never questioned her abilities, never suggested she was in over her head, never made jokes about women in combat roles. "Morning, Ghost," Morrison said, his voice carrying the easy familiarity of shared danger. "Heard the ground team's been talking trash about our flying abilities." There was an edge to his words that suggested he'd overheard more than just casual conversation. Morrison stood 6'4" and could bench press twice his weight, the kind of imposing presence that made smart-mouthed infantry soldiers reconsider their comments about female pilots. "Let them talk," Kaczynski replied, running through her instrument checks with methodical precision. "They'll sing a different tune once we're overhead." Her fingers moved across the controls with practiced efficiency, each action performed exactly as she'd been trained, exactly as she'd done hundreds of times before in conditions ranging from routine patrols to emergency extractions under heavy fire. The Apache's engines began their startup sequence, twin turboshafts building to operational power with a sound that never got old. The vibration traveled through the airframe and into her bones, a reminder that she was about to become one with 30 tons of lethal machinery designed for a single purpose: keeping American soldiers alive by killing anyone who threatened them. The helicopter's weapon systems came online with soft electronic chirps, 30mm chain gun, Hellfire missiles, and 2.75-inch rockets, all ready to deliver precise destruction at her command. As the pre-flight checklist continued, she found her mind drifting to the classified file she knew Commander Reeves had been reading. The missions detailed in those pages represented the hardest flying of her career, operations where success was measured in lives saved rather than enemies killed. Each redacted paragraph contained stories of split-second decisions made under impossible circumstances, of pushing aircraft and crew beyond safe limits because the alternative was watching good soldiers die. The file wouldn't mention the nightmares that followed some missions, or the way her hands sometimes shook during routine flights when memories of tracer fire and surface-to-air missiles intruded without warning. It wouldn't describe the letters she'd written to families of soldiers she couldn't save, or the weight of command decisions that traded acceptable losses against mission success. Those details never made it into official reports, but they lived in the spaces between her heartbeats. Morrison completed the weapons systems check and gave her a thumbs up through the intercom. "All green, Ghost. We're ready to dance." His calm confidence was reassuring, a reminder that she wasn't facing this mission alone. In the front seat, Morrison controlled the Apache's devastating firepower while she handled flight operations, a partnership that had proven effective through dozens of combat sorties. The radio crackled again as Mission Control provided final authorization. "Ghost 77, you are cleared for tactical departure. Proceed to Rally Point Alpha and await further instructions. Good hunting." The formal language couldn't mask the underlying tension everyone felt about this mission. Intelligence reports were sketchy, weather conditions were marginal, and the extraction zone offered limited options if things went wrong. Kaczynski acknowledged the transmission and began her taxi to the active runway. The Apache's rotor wash kicking up clouds of desert dust that painted everything in shades of brown and tan. Through her helmet's visor, she could see other aircraft preparing for various missions: transport helicopters loaded with supplies, reconnaissance drones being prepped for surveillance flights, and fighter jets that would provide top cover if the situation deteriorated beyond what ground forces could handle. But none of those other crews carried the specific burden she faced today. They hadn't endured the casual mockery of soldiers who would soon depend on their skills for survival. They weren't flying into combat with something to prove beyond the standard requirements of military professionalism. For Alina Kaczynski, this mission represented an opportunity to demonstrate what 17 years of training and combat experience actually meant when lives hung in the balance. The tower cleared them for takeoff, and she pulled collective pitch to lift the Apache into the morning sky. The Apache climbed through 3,000 feet, its twin engines maintaining steady power as desert landscape spread below like a tactical map come to life. Kaczynski banked southeast toward the rally point, scanning instruments while her eyes swept the horizon for threats that intelligence might have missed. The morning air was smooth, but she knew that would change as thermal activity increased with the rising sun. Heat shimmer would make target identification more challenging, and turbulence would test every skill she developed during thousands of hours in rotary-wing aircraft. "Ghost 77, this is Overwatch," came the voice of the mission controller, a captain whose job was coordinating multiple aircraft and ground elements from a command center 60 miles away. "Be advised, we have enemy activity reports in your area of operations. Recommend heightened alert status." The transmission carried an undertone of concern that made experienced aircrew pay attention to details they might otherwise overlook. Morrison's voice came through the intercom with professional calm masking underlying tension. "I've got thermals on the FLIR showing vehicle movement approximately 10 clicks northeast of the extraction zone. Could be enemy repositioning in response to our activities." The forward-looking infrared system painted heat signatures on his display, allowing him to identify potential threats long before they became immediate dangers. Through her headset, Kaczynski could hear radio chatter from other elements of the mission package. Transport helicopters were holding at safe distances, waiting for clearance to approach the landing zone. Fighter aircraft circled at high altitude, ready to deliver close air support if the ground situation deteriorated beyond what her Apache could handle alone. The careful orchestration of multiple platforms represented months of planning compressed into a few hours of actual execution. The rally point appeared ahead as a cluster of coordinates on her moving map display, but to her trained eye, it was much more than electronic navigation data. The terrain offered concealment from ground-based threats while providing clear sight lines to the extraction zone 8 kilometers beyond. Natural rock formations would mask their heat signature from enemy sensors, while elevation gave them tactical advantage over anyone operating in the valley below. As they approached the holding area, her radio crackled with a transmission that made her blood pressure spike. "Ghost 77, this is Neptune 6. Commander Reeves' voice carried the clipped professionalism of special operations personnel, but she could detect something different in his tone, a subtle shift from the casual dismissal she'd heard at breakfast to something approaching actual respect. "Neptune 6, Ghost 77, send your traffic," she replied, maintaining the same professional courtesy she'd shown despite their earlier treatment. Military protocol demanded nothing less, regardless of personal feelings about soldiers who judged capabilities based on appearances rather than performance records. "Ghost, be advised we've reviewed your mission history and want to apologize for our earlier comments. We didn't realize we were working with someone of your experience level." The admission carried weight that extended beyond simple courtesy. Special operations personnel rarely apologized for anything and never admitted mistakes unless they recognized genuine expertise they'd failed to acknowledge. Kaczynski felt a mix of vindication and sadness wash over her. Vindication that her reputation had finally reached the right ears, sadness that it had taken classified files rather than professional introduction to earn basic respect. "Copy that, Neptune 6. Let's focus on bringing everyone home safe." Her response acknowledged the apology without dwelling on the hurt their dismissal had caused. The extraction zone came into view as she descended to tactical altitude, a narrow valley surrounded by steep ridges that channeled wind in unpredictable patterns. The landing site itself was barely large enough for the transport helicopters that would carry the SEAL team and their rescued personnel to safety. Surrounding terrain offered numerous positions where enemy fighters could establish ambush sites with overlapping fields of fire. "I count 6 potential threat locations," Morrison reported through the intercom, his voice maintaining the steady calm that marked experienced aircrew under pressure. "Ridgeline positions offer commanding views of the entire valley. If they're smart, they've got people in those rocks with RPGs and heavy machine guns." Kaczynski acknowledged his assessment while studying the tactical situation developing below. Intelligence reports suggested the rescue target was being held in a compound approximately 1 kilometer from the extraction zone, connected by a narrow road that wound through terrain ideal for enemy ambushes. The SEAL team would have to move on foot through areas where a single well-placed explosive device could end the mission before it properly began. Her Apache carried enough firepower to level every suspected threat position, but rules of engagement required positive identification before engaging targets in an area where civilians might be present. The balance between protecting American forces and avoiding collateral damage demanded split-second decisions that could determine whether everyone returned home or whether flag-draped coffins would be loaded onto transport aircraft. Through her headset, she heard the transport helicopters receiving final clearance for their approach to the insertion point. In minutes, 12 Navy SEALs would be on the ground in hostile territory, depending on her ability to provide close air support against whatever threats emerged from the surrounding mountains. The weight of that responsibility settled across her shoulders like a familiar burden, heavy but manageable through years of experience carrying similar loads. The first indication something was wrong came as a barely audible whisper through her headset, the kind of transmission that suggested someone was speaking directly into their microphone while trying not to be overheard. "Ghost 77, Neptune 6. We have eyes on multiple heat signatures moving toward the extraction zone. Request immediate reconnaissance of ridgeline positions." Kaczynski responded by banking the Apache toward the suspect locations, while Morrison activated the aircraft's advanced sensor suite. The modernized target acquisition designation site could distinguish between human signatures and background thermal noise, painting potential threats on their shared display with precision that eliminated guesswork from target identification. What they saw made both aircrew tense with recognition of tactical disadvantage. "Count 12. Possibly 15 individuals in fighting positions along the western ridgeline," Morrison reported with professional calm that barely masked underlying concern. "They've got crew-served weapons, RPGs, and what looks like a vehicle-mounted heavy machine gun in defilade behind that rock outcropping. Each identified threat represented exponentially increased danger for the ground team preparing to move through the valley below. The tactical situation was developing exactly as intelligence had warned, but worse than anyone had hoped. Enemy forces had established interlocking fields of fire that could turn the narrow valley into a killing zone, where even highly trained special operations personnel would struggle to survive. The Apache's weapon systems could neutralize most threats, but not simultaneously, and not without exposing the helicopter to surface-to-air missiles that intelligence suggested were present in the area. Neptune 6, Ghost 77, she transmitted while adjusting their orbit to maintain visual contact with all identified threat locations. I show multiple enemy positions with heavy weapons oriented on your movement route. Recommend delaying insertion until we can neutralize high-priority targets. Her suggestion carried the weight of combat experience that recognized when tactical conditions favored enemy forces over friendly operations. Commander Reeves' response came immediately, tinged with frustration that suggested mission timelines were driving decisions rather than tactical considerations. Ghost, we're committed to this timeline. The target won't be at this location much longer, and whether conditions are deteriorating for our extract window. The admission revealed pressure from higher command levels, the kind of strategic imperatives that sometimes forced tactical compromises no one wanted to make. Through her canopy, Kaczynski could see storm clouds building on the distant horizon, confirming Reeves' assessment of deteriorating weather conditions. In 2 hours, wind speeds and visibility would make helicopter operations significantly more dangerous, potentially impossible if conditions continued to worsen. The mission was trapped between tactical risks on the ground and meteorological hazards that could strand everyone in hostile territory. She keyed her microphone for the transmission that would commit them all to a course of action with life-or-death consequences. Neptune 6, Ghost 77. Understand the timeline pressure. We'll provide cover during your movement, but you need to know the threat level is higher than intelligence suggested. Stay low, move fast, and trust us to keep the high ground clear. Morrison's voice came through the intercom with a question that needed answering before they proceeded further. Ghost, what's our engagement protocol if they light up the ground team? Some of those positions are danger close to civilian structures. The question highlighted the ethical complexity of modern warfare, where protecting American soldiers sometimes conflicted with minimizing harm to non-combatants caught in combat zones through no fault of their own. We protect our people, she replied without hesitation, the answer carrying implications that would follow her long after this mission ended. But we're precise about it. No area weapons unless there's no alternative, and we call every shot before we take it. Her response balanced military necessity against moral responsibility, the kind of decision-making that separated professional soldiers from those who saw warfare as an excuse for indiscriminate violence. The radio crackled again as the transport helicopters reported reaching their insertion point. All stations, Neptune 7, we are beginning insertion now. Ground team will be moving in approximately 3 minutes. The announcement marked the transition from planning to execution, the moment when theoretical tactics would be tested against actual enemy resistance. Kaczynski adjusted the Apache's position to provide optimal observation of the entire valley, while maintaining sufficient altitude to avoid small arms fire from ground positions. The helicopter's sensors painted a comprehensive picture of the tactical situation. Friendly forces moving through concealment toward their objective, enemy positions maintaining discipline while waiting for optimal engagement opportunities, and civilian structures scattered throughout the area in patterns that complicated targeting decisions. Below them, 12 of America's most elite warriors were about to enter a potential killing zone, trusting their lives to a woman they dismissed as a waitress 6 hours earlier. The SEAL team materialized from the landscape like ghosts given substance, their movements so subtle that even Kaczynski's trained eye struggled to track individual team members as they advanced toward their objective. Through the Apache's advanced optics, she watched Commander Reeves lead his men through terrain that channeled their approach into predictable corridors where enemy forces could establish devastating ambushes. Every step carried them deeper into tactical disadvantage, but also closer to the American intelligence officer who'd been held captive for 3 days. Ghost 77, Neptune 6, Reeves transmitted with controlled tension that suggested contact was imminent. We have visual on the objective building. Thermal signatures indicate approximately 6 individuals inside, but can't determine which are hostile and which might be our target. The uncertainty highlighted the complex reality of rescue operations, where split-second decisions meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Morrison's voice came through the intercom with an edge of urgency. "I've got movement from those ridgeline positions. They're adjusting their weapons toward the compound, probably waiting for our people to breach before they open up." His assessment confirmed Kaczynski's tactical evaluation. Enemy forces were disciplined enough to wait for maximum effect rather than revealing their positions prematurely. The next 60 seconds would determine whether this mission became a textbook example of special operations success or a case study in how quickly combat situations could deteriorate beyond recovery. Kaczynski adjusted the Apache's position to provide optimal fields of fire while maintaining communication with both the ground team and higher command elements, monitoring the operation from secure facilities hundreds of miles away. "All stations, Neptune 6, we are moving to breach position now." Commander Reeves' transmission carried finality that marked the point of no return. In moments, explosive charges would blast through reinforced doors while SEAL team members flooded into rooms where American and enemy personnel waited in circumstances that would test every aspect of their training and experience. The ridgeline erupted in muzzle flashes as enemy fighters opened fire with coordinated precision that suggested military training rather than militia enthusiasm. Heavy machine gun tracers reached across the valley like deadly fingers seeking American targets, while rocket-propelled grenades exploded against rock formations that provided minimal cover for advancing ground forces. The carefully planned mission was disintegrating into the kind of chaotic firefight where survival depended on superior training and supporting fires. Ghost 77, Neptune 6, we are taking effective fire from multiple positions. Request immediate close air support on the western ridgeline. Reeves' transmission carried the controlled desperation of professional soldiers under extreme pressure, men who'd trained for exactly this situation, but hoped never to face it in actual combat operations. Kaczynski's response was immediate and decisive. "Neptune 6, Ghost 77, engaging western ridgeline positions now. Keep your heads down." Her thumbs found the weapon release switches, while Morrison designated targets with laser precision that would guide 30mm cannon rounds and Hellfire missiles to their intended destinations with surgical accuracy. The Apache shuddered as its chain gun opened fire, sending depleted uranium rounds downrange at 625 rounds per minute. Each projectile carried enough kinetic energy to penetrate armored vehicles, and the psychological effect on enemy personnel was as devastating as the physical destruction. The sound alone, a distinctive BRRRT that carried for miles, announced that American air power had entered the fight. Through her targeting display, she watched enemy fighters scatter from positions they'd held with confidence moments before. Some sought deeper cover, others attempted to return fire with small arms that were ineffective against the Apache's armor plating, and a few simply fled the battlefield rather than face weapons they couldn't match. The shift in tactical momentum was immediate and decisive. "Ghost 77, Neptune 6, came Reeves' voice with audible relief. "That broke their attack. We're moving to the objective now." The transmission confirmed what Kaczynski's sensors were showing. Enemy resistance was collapsing under precise application of rotary wing firepower that eliminated threats while minimizing collateral damage to civilian structures throughout the valley. But victory celebrations were premature. Morrison's voice carried warning that reminded everyone why combat operations remained dangerous until the last friendly soldier reached safety. "I've got multiple vehicles approaching from the northeast. Looks like enemy reinforcements responding to the contact." The tactical situation was evolving from isolated firefight to extended engagement that could overwhelm even elite ground forces. Through the Apache's sensors, Kaczynski counted at least 8 vehicles approaching at high speed, their heat signatures indicating they carried significantly more personnel than the original enemy force. The mission was expanding beyond its original parameters, testing American capabilities against larger enemy formations than intelligence had predicted. Success would require every aspect of training, experience, and equipment to function flawlessly under combat conditions. The radio crackled with multiple transmissions as various elements reported their status and requested instructions from higher command. The compound erupted in controlled explosions as SEAL team members breached multiple entry points simultaneously, their movements coordinated with precision that reflected thousands of hours of rehearsal under conditions designed to replicate combat stress. Through the Apache's thermal imaging system, Kaczynski watched individual team members move through the building's interior like deadly shadows, each man covering assigned sectors while advancing toward objectives that would determine mission success or failure. Ghost 77, Neptune 6, Commander Reeves transmitted between bursts of automatic weapons fire echoing from inside the compound. "We have secured the target. Repeat, we have our person and are moving to the extraction zone now." The announcement carried professional satisfaction that barely masked the relief of finding their rescue objective alive and capable of movement under his own power. But tactical conditions were deteriorating rapidly as enemy reinforcements closed on their position. Morrison's voice came through the intercom with increasing urgency as he tracked multiple threat vectors converging on the narrow valley. "I count 12 vehicles now, possibly more. They're moving to cut off escape routes and establish blocking positions between our people and the extraction zone." The approaching enemy force represented significantly more resistance than the original mission plan had anticipated. What had begun as a precision rescue operation was evolving into a running firefight where American forces would be outnumbered and outgunned, unless air support could neutralize threats faster than they could be reinforced. The Apache's weapon load was substantial, but not infinite, and extended engagement would eventually exhaust their ammunition supply. "Neptune 6, Ghost 77, she transmitted while adjusting their orbit to maintain visual contact with both friendly forces and approaching threats. "I show multiple enemy vehicles attempting to establish blocking positions along your egress route. Recommend alternate extraction site if available." Her suggestion reflected tactical realities that ground commanders sometimes overlooked when focused on predetermined plans rather than evolving battlefield conditions. Reeves' response carried frustration that suggested limited alternatives. "Ghost, alternate sites require movement through terrain that offers no cover and extends our exposure time significantly. We're committed to the original extraction zone unless absolutely necessary to change." The admission revealed constraints imposed by geography, weather, and tactical timelines that left little room for improvisation, even when conditions deteriorated beyond expectations. Through her canopy, storm clouds were building with ominous speed, confirming meteorological reports that had warned of rapidly changing weather conditions. In less than an hour, wind speeds and visibility would make helicopter operations extremely hazardous, potentially impossible if conditions continued to worsen at their current rate. The mission was caught between enemy action and natural forces, both threatening American lives in ways that required immediate tactical solutions. The first enemy vehicle crested a ridge approximately 3 kilometers from the extraction zone, its occupants visible through thermal imaging as they prepared crew-served weapons for engagement with American forces. The tactical situation was reaching a decision point, where aggressive action might prevent enemy forces from establishing positions that could prove impossible to dislodge without unacceptable casualties to friendly personnel. Morrison, designate that lead vehicle, she instructed while maneuvering the Apache into optimal firing position. We're going to break up their formation before they can establish effective blocking positions. Her decision committed them to extended engagement with enemy forces whose numbers and capabilities remained unknown, but the alternative was allowing hostile fighters to control terrain essential for mission success. The Hellfire missile streaked downrange with invisible precision, its laser guidance system tracking the designated target through atmospheric conditions that would have challenged less sophisticated weapon systems. The explosion lifted the vehicle completely off the ground before dropping twisted metal and scattered debris across a 100-meter radius, sending an unmistakable message to other enemy fighters about American capabilities and resolve. Secondary explosions suggested the vehicle had been carrying ammunition or fuel, adding to the psychological impact on enemy forces, who were learning that American air support could reach any target with devastating precision. The remaining vehicles immediately dispersed from their tight formation, seeking cover among rock formations that would complicate subsequent targeting decisions. Ghost 77, Neptune 6, came Reeves' transmission with appreciation that professional soldiers felt when air support performed exactly as advertised. That got their attention. We're moving toward the extraction zone now, but we'll need continued close air support to keep those vehicles suppressed. The SEAL team emerged from the compound with their rescued intelligence officer, a man whose classified knowledge had made him worth extreme risk to recover, but whose physical condition suggested his captivity had involved more than simple detention. Through the Apache's optics, she could see team members providing assistance to someone who was mobile but clearly struggling with injuries or exhaustion that would complicate their movement to safety. Enemy reinforcements continued arriving despite the destruction of their lead vehicle, suggesting coordination and determination that exceeded typical militia capabilities. The valley had become a cauldron of coordinated violence as SEAL team members moved through terrain that offered minimal cover, while enemy forces attempted to establish interlocking fields of fire from multiple positions. Tracer rounds crisscrossed the narrow space like deadly lightning, each burst representing someone's attempt to kill or avoid being killed in circumstances that tested every aspect of military training and personal courage. Ghost 77, Neptune 6, Commander Reeves transmitted between the distinctive crack of rifle fire and deeper percussion of explosive devices. We are taking effective fire from prepared positions along both sides of the valley. These aren't militia, they're moving and shooting like military personnel. His assessment confirmed intelligence failures that had underestimated enemy capabilities, suggesting the rescue mission had stumbled into a more sophisticated trap than anyone had anticipated. Morrison's voice carried professional calm despite the tactical complexity unfolding below them. I've got designated targets on the eastern ridgeline, but they're positioned within 50 meters of what appear to be civilian structures. Engagement will require precision fires to avoid collateral damage. The observation highlighted ethical constraints that professional military forces accepted even when they complicated tactical solutions to immediate threats. Kaczynski studied the target array through her helmet-mounted display, evaluating options that balance protection of American forces against minimizing harm to non-combatants who might be present in nearby buildings. Each potential engagement carried moral implications that would follow her long after this mission ended, but the alternative was allowing enemy fighters to maintain positions from which they could kill American servicemen with impunity. Neptune 6, Ghost 77, she transmitted while adjusting the Apache's position for optimal firing angles. I can engage eastern positions with precision fires, but you need to mark your exact location to ensure we don't put rounds danger close to friendly forces. Her request reflected standard operating procedures designed to prevent fratricide incidents that had plagued military operations throughout history. The infrared strobe appeared on her display as Reeves activated the marking device that would distinguish his team's position from surrounding threats. The small beacon was invisible to enemy fighters, but appeared as a distinctive signature through the Apache sensors, providing reference point for navigation and targeting that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic friendly fire incidents. Weather conditions were deteriorating faster than meteorological forecasts had predicted. Wind speeds were approaching the limits of safe helicopter operations, while visibility was decreasing as dust and debris filled the air. The extraction helicopters would soon face conditions that made landing in confined areas extremely hazardous, potentially impossible if environmental factors continued to worsen at their current rate. "All stations overwatch," came the mission controller's voice with concern that reflected monitoring of multiple information sources. "Weather conditions are approaching extraction abort criteria. Recommend expediting ground operations if possible." The transmission carried implications that everyone understood. If conditions deteriorated much further, the rescue team would be stranded in hostile territory until weather improved enough to allow helicopter operations. Kaczynski acknowledged the transmission while engaging her first target on the eastern ridgeline. The 30mm cannon round struck with surgical precision, eliminating the threat while leaving adjacent structures untouched. Each projectile was carefully aimed and accounted for, reflecting training that emphasized precision over volume of fire in complex tactical environments where collateral damage carried strategic consequences. The psychological effect on enemy forces was immediate and decisive. Fighters who had been maintaining disciplined fire positions began retreating from locations that no longer offered protection against American air support. Some attempted to relocate to positions that offered better cover, others simply fled the battlefield, and a few continued fighting with the desperate courage of personnel who recognized their tactical situation was hopeless. "Ghost 77, Neptune 6, Reeves transmitted with audible movement in his voice. "Your fires are breaking their resistance. We're advancing toward the extraction zone now." The ground team was moving faster, their rescued intelligence officer supported by team members who balanced speed against security in terrain that still harbored unknown threats. Through the Apache sensors, she could see the extraction helicopters holding at a safe distance, their crews monitoring weather conditions and tactical developments that would determine whether they could safely enter the valley to recover American personnel. Every passing minute reduced their operational window, while increasing the risk that environmental conditions would force mission abort. The next few minutes would determine whether this rescue operation ended in success, or became another example of how quickly combat situations could exceed the capabilities of even elite military forces operating with superior equipment and training. Morrison's voice cut through radio chatter with the kind of sharp urgency that made experienced aircrew pay immediate attention to developing threats. "I've got missile launch from the northern ridgeline. SAM in the air." His warning gave her perhaps 3 seconds to react before the surface-to-air missile's proximity fuse would detonate a warhead designed specifically to destroy aircraft operating in support of ground forces. Kaczynski's response was instantaneous and decisive, muscle memory taking over as she threw the Apache into an evasive maneuver that stressed the aircraft's airframe beyond normal operational limits. Collective pitch down, hard right cyclic, and chaff dispensers firing metallic clouds designed to confuse the missile's guidance system. The helicopter plunged toward the valley floor while shedding altitude at a rate that would have been suicidal under any other circumstances. The missile detonated 40 meters behind their previous position, its fragmentation warhead shredding air that would have contained their aircraft if not for reflexes developed through years of training in environments where reaction time measured the difference between survival and death. Shrapnel rattled against the Apache's armor plating with sounds like hail on a metal roof, but penetration alarms remained silent. "Holy shit, Ghost!" Morrison's voice carried genuine admiration mixed with adrenaline-fueled relief. That was some flying. His professional assessment reflected the reality that evasive maneuvers at low altitude in confined terrain required skills that separated competent pilots from truly exceptional ones. The woman his ground team had dismissed as a waitress had just demonstrated abilities that few aviators possessed. But tactical conditions continued to deteriorate as enemy forces revealed capabilities that intelligence reports had completely failed to identify. The presence of surface-to-air missiles suggested military-grade equipment and training that exceeded anything associated with typical regional militia forces. Someone had provided sophisticated weapons and instruction in their employment against rotary-wing aircraft. Ghost 77, Neptune 6, Commander Reeves transmitted with controlled tension that reflected ground combat intensifying beyond manageable levels. "We are approximately 200 meters from the extraction zone, but enemy forces are attempting to establish blocking positions between us and the landing site. We need immediate suppression of those positions, or we won't make it to pickup." Through the Apache's targeting systems, she could see muzzle flashes from multiple locations as enemy fighters attempted to prevent American forces from reaching safety. The tactical situation had evolved into a race between SEAL team movement and enemy reinforcement, with air support serving as the decisive factor that could tip the balance in either direction. The extraction helicopters were holding at maximum safe distance, their crews monitoring weather conditions that continued to worsen despite optimistic forecasts. Radio transmissions from their aircraft carried increasing concern about wind speeds and visibility that were approaching operational limits for rotary-wing aircraft in confined landing zones. "Overwatch, Ghost 77, she transmitted while adjusting position to engage the blocking force. "Weather conditions are affecting aircraft performance and targeting accuracy. Recommend prioritizing extraction over extended engagement." Her assessment reflected pilot experience with